have this beautiful mic. Excellent, so people can hear us on their live stream. Right, so thanks everyone. So I am Obi from X, and it's my great pleasure to welcome today Ramona Pierson, who has an extraordinary career. And I'm going to try and summarize it, but then I think through the questions I'm going to ask you, you're going to do a much better job. So Ramona started her career as a Marine and then had an accident age 22, which was not just any old accident, but a pretty significant one. And she'll tell you a bit more about that. She came out of an 18-month coma to do her first degree in psychology, then one in sociology. Then she did a master's in education, ended up running EdTech for the Seattle public schools. And then she wasn't content with that, but she then also went and got a PhD in neuroscience. And so if you look at that sort of eclectic background, it's no surprise that you've done some really interesting companies as well. So currently you're the co-founder and the chief executive officer of Declara, which is looking at new methods of learning analytics using machine learning. But you also were a chief science officer and head of policy, which I think is a really interesting combination, at another edtech company, Promethean. And you launched Synaptic Match, which was a personalized learning tech company. You're an advisor to many, many different things, from Teach for Mexico, Change the Equation, and you've been a speaker and a mentor in many different places. So what I thought to kick us off, given that your sort of life path is so multifaceted, it was really hard to pick where to start, but then I kept coming back to the accident. And so I'm going to ask you to tell us the story in your own words, like what happened and what happened afterwards.
That's great. So the story of my accident, it's interesting because it seemed to be a pivotal point. And right now I feel a little bit like Benjamin Button because I get to live backwards and forwards a little bit because of this accident. And, as I tell the story, you'll kind of understand why. When I was a kid, I was at Berkeley for pre-med, and I grew up with a very strange father. So he was a scientist, and as you know, scientists can be very strange. So, but the key he gave me was two things. One, to be a risk taker, and the other was to be an innovator. And that has followed me through everything and probably is what saved my life. And so I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for risk takers and innovators. So first of all, as growing up, my father was a propulsion scientist. He used to make bombs and other kinds of propulsion things, such as the lifting carriages for the Apollo program. So when I'd go to school, my dad would always go, try anything, and I would create grenades and other kinds of bombs, and of course that got me expelled quite often. Today I'd be a terrorist, but at that time, he was very proud of me. Unfortunately, he died when I was young, and I went to Berkeley, and I ran out of money because I was a kid and I was stupid and I didn't really understand how you were supposed to make money last, because I was, an athlete, but I was also a pre-med student, and I was 16 years old. So by the time I was 18, I had an opportunity to join the Marine Corps, and they had offered to pay for all of my college forever. So I thought, oh, this is the best way to get my medical degree. So, and I thought, this is going to be so cool. I get to run through the jungle with my M16 and have my face painted and look real mean.
Blow things up.
Yes, I just love the idea of killing people and making bombs. But then, of course, they shoved me into a dark room where all I did were math equations all the time. So I think you Googlers would appreciate this. I was Google Earth before Google Earth, because at that time you had a bunch of kids in dark rooms in the Pentagon writing a bunch of algorithms to try to reverse engineer where nuclear silos in Russia were. And that was when Russia was our enemy and not our friend. So sometimes today is confusing what's happening. So So I had this really interesting job, really, and but I ran a lot. You know, I ran marathons and other things. And one day I had picked up my dog's leash, put it on her, and I went to go for a run. And at the same time that I was crossing an intersection, a drunk driver had run the red light, and my dog actually is responsible for me not getting caught under the car. She ended up being, you know, devastated and killed instantly there. My left foot got caught up in the wheel well of the car and spun my leg around. My throat got nicked by the bumper, and I suffered from blunt chest trauma. So your aorta comes up around your heart and behind, and right where it bends, it got pinched. And so my life's blood was pouring out of me, and my mouth was frothing, and probably that was the end of me. But somebody on the side of the road actually had an old technology used in a new way. So he took a big pin, pulled it apart, and put it through my throat. I should sue him for the scar I have. But anyway, he ended up saving my life. And it's interesting because he was able to turn that technology on its head and be able to put oxygen into my lungs so that I'd make it to the hospital. When I made it to the hospital, a doctor took the risk to actually go against the FDA and his licensing board. So it wasn't until just 6 years ago that they allowed people to be put into drug-induced comas and to be packed in ice and have their body temperatures reduced to save their brain. So this emergency room doctor packed me in ice and reduced my body temperature, put me into a drug-induced coma. You know, I don't think he thought I'd be in a coma for 18 months, but I woke up 18 months later, and I have my cognitive faculties because he actually broke the rules, broke the law. And that was an innovator taking a risk to save somebody's life, and he saved my life. So I ended up waking up out of the coma completely blind. I lost my vision in both eyes, and I wasn't able to speak for obvious reasons. I couldn't walk, you know, for other obvious reasons, but also I was 64 pounds, and they did not think that I would survive. And so the other best thing that happened to me was the hospital giving up on me. And that's a weird thing to say, but they could not help me recover. And so by giving up on me, they transferred me to a senior citizens home. So imagine the power of having 100 grandparents who are focused on you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I never got a break. But the power of that were twofold. One, that they did not have the insights that the physicians had. So they didn't have the predetermination that I was going to die, or they didn't think I would fail. So they were thinking that my life, since I was so young, I was 22 at the time, my life was still sun rising while theirs was sun setting. So they put a lot of energy into assessing my needs. And the thing that they taught me was personalized learning, the power of collaboration and personalized learning, because they assessed all of my learning needs, which were great. You know, I had to learn to walk, to talk, to eat, to buy food, to learn Braille, to live as a blind person in a sighted world. And so what they had done, unbeknownst to me, was they assessed my needs, had an emergency meeting, and then they went, oh my God, ET has landed here in our senior citizens home. So, you know, you can imagine here at that time, I was 68 pounds, I was completely bald, and couldn't interact with these folks. And so what they ultimately did is they broke up all the work. So one person, the manager of the place, decided she'd try to teach me to speak again. So they rebuilt my throat, and when they did, it's very difficult to relearn how to speak. You take it for granted when you're a baby because you practice, you go goo goo gaga. But what you're doing is you're learning how to trap air in your mouth and coordinate your tongue and to be able to release through your vocal cords and get your vocal cords to work perfectly. Well, she was getting frustrated because I wouldn't practice because my ego got in the way because I'm like, I'm an adult and I don't want to sound like a baby. So the men decided that they would play cuss word scrapple with me at night. This is where I learned gamification and the power of laughter. So at night, I'd learn how to say every cuss word a Navy person would come up with. And so you can imagine what my first words were with the office manager in the morning. So we won't get into that because it's a little embarrassing. But anyway, by bringing in laughter and community and gamification, it helped me overcome a lot of the fears in my own ego issues. And then the other issues I had to come up with were learning how to cross the street again. So imagine having post-traumatic stress disorder, and you have to go up to a street where there are cars going back and forth. And now close your eyes. What's straight? So where is the beginning? How do you time yourself? How do you find the traffic lights so that you know that the light should be changing? Anyway, when I'd come up to the curb, I couldn't cross it. I was scared. And so one of the senior citizens basically said to me, when you come up to the curb, you can feel where the curb is. Just stand there, listen for the traffic, and then when you think it's time to cross, stick the cane out. So I stuck the cane out, and after 3 times, my cane went whizzing across the street and probably pissed off every driver in the neighborhood. They realized that I needed to go to the Braille Institute to learn how to be a blind person. So the senior citizens raised money, sent me to LA, took a train, and that's a whole story unto itself, to be blind on a train and try to figure that out. But anyway, I ended up in LA, learned how Braille and how to walk around and how not to cut my fingers off when I cook and do other things. So I went back to the senior citizens home, and then they realized, I was going to continue running into things that they couldn't deal with. So they raised money again, sent me to go get a seeing eye dog, and the seeing eye dog helped me in various ways. So one of the issues that the senior citizens didn't know how to help me get over, which was walking down the sidewalk, and when there are trees, once in a while I'd get a tree branch would go right through my eyeball. So because I couldn't see it and I didn't know to wear glasses and I wouldn't think about blinking. So there are these weird things that probably freaked out most people. But so then having a seeing eye dog, my guide dog would scan up and scan down and stop at the cracks, give me signals when there were branches, and so that I'd clear the branches. So it was interesting, and I learned how to write algorithms because of my seeing eye dog. And you're going to think that's the craziest thing in the world. But when you have a guide dog, the first thing that you realize is that, just like an algorithm, that they are very specific. And when you have a new algorithm, they're kind of stupid. They do if-then statements the way you say to do them. Then the next thing I realized from having a seeing eye dog, after I had Annie for a while, that was her name, she started to be able to anticipate and predict the things that I needed based on my behaviors. And so, like, I'd go to school, I went back to college, and she knew which classes I would take. She knew what bus stops I'd stop at, what grocery store I'd go to, all of the things that I had. So I no longer had to command her or tell her what to do. She had my schedule. She'd anticipate my needs. So she taught me predictive analytics through my behaviors. And she'd do funny things. Like when I first got her, I'd go, okay, Annie, go to office hours. I have to see Dr. Skirky. And this was before she became a little bit more nuanced. So she'd go looking all over for him, and I'm thinking I'm going to see him in the office. And so I walk into some place, and next thing I know, my professor's like, Ramona, I'm at the urinal. perhaps we should meet in the office and not in the bathroom. But, you know, when I first got Annie, she did not understand specificity. So over time, she realized that perhaps humans don't like to have meetings in the bathroom. So over time, then I learned transformative algorithms from Annie. And that was when she would decide to override my commands. So sometimes I'd tell her certain things to do, but she would go, not only is this not right for you to do, but it's dangerous for you to do. So I'm going to not follow your commands, which is irritating. But she would cross the street to avoid various people. She would do different things to make sure that my safety came first. So that's how I learned about the power of predictive analytics and transformative analytics, where you actually start to anticipate what's going to help people become better and faster before they can even think about what those items might be or those things might be. So the other thing that I ended up going through is when I had the opportunity to have surgery. So I lived as a blind person for 11 years. I became very used to being blind, and I had my community, I had my education, I was back at work, my guide dog was doing everything for me. In fact, I couldn't imagine living a life without my dog, be like cutting my arm off. And we just did everything together. And somebody had offered to do brain surgery on me to get my vision back in my left eye. And I declined having that surgery. And that gets back to, one, I became comfortable. And I was giving up an opportunity to actually have something amazing happen in my life. And I wasn't taking on the leadership opportunity. I was just sort of following in my steps I became comfortable with. And then Annie became sick. She ended up with cancer. And so I decided I needed to do something. So the 2 years that it took there, I was offered robotic surgery, which was a better outcome for me because then I wouldn't have someone shaking as they're drilling through my skull. So I went through this surgery and I was able to get the vision back in my left eye. And it wasn't magical. So when I got my vision back, I suffered from something called associative blindness. And that was because my whole life had turned neurologically and cognitively. I stored all of my memories as sound and tactile. So I'd look at people and I'd go, what are they? You know, and then they'd move and I'd go, that's weird. And then I'd have to reach out and touch somebody. I only could recognize people if I heard their voice or smelled them, which is a weird thing to do. But when you're blind, people let you smell them. But when you're sighted, people don't want you smelling them. So anyway, I had these odd behaviors that I picked up as a blind person, which was took me maybe a decade to get over. But, you know, there are some things I had to relearn. I had to look at things and actually touch them to associate them. So I decided the best way to learn to see again was to move to New York City so that I'd up the ante and get a lot of activity with people. And I learned the word fuck off all the time because every time I'd turn around, the New Yorkers were telling me to F off everywhere I went because I'd touch them or sniff them or, you know, hold on to them. Anyway, so I got back into my life. But the biggest change that I realized was not just that all of a sudden we had cell phones, cars changed, people weren't wearing neon anymore because when my accident happened, it was in the 80s and, you know, a lot of things changed. And I looked down at my hand and I realized that time had marched on and that I had aged. And it was profound in a way that is very hard to describe, to realize that you've lost this huge number of years. So in my head, I thought, I have to hurry up. I have to accelerate my career and I need to do things because in my mind, I had this sense of, you know, that, you know, as you're blind, you're not seeing time going by. But as a sighted person, you realize time is constantly ticking and that your time is short. And so I had two things on my side: the gift of death, which accelerates your ability to live, and now I saw time, and so that got me back into my career faster.
Okay. So that kind of then gets you into the second chapter of your career, right? So now you've founded and been the CEO of a whole bunch of different tech companies, which is still rare. There's still not that many women leading tech companies, founding tech companies. So you're definitely one of the success stories here. Tell us some war stories. Like, what are some moments that you're really proud of? What are some moments that were embarrassing once you got over the sniffing people?
Oh, there's so many war stories. We need 2 days. But, startups are, it's like an addiction, because it's like post-traumatic stress disorder every day. You keep replaying certain things over and over again. But fundraising is always a war story. I mean, you'll get 1,000 no's to 1 yes. And it's a very difficult thing to have, because as a startup CEO or an innovator, you're looking into the future and looking around the corner. And you have to remember that your investors and also your market can't see what's coming. Innovators see what's around the corner. So how do you describe what's coming? Like, Facebook was interesting because I was doing a Gates project a long time ago. I hate to age myself more than I have, but I was working on a project through the Gates Foundation, and I took this big data warehouse and took all the student data in. And before people thought about analytics, I was doing that. And then I thought I could get better analytics if I rolled out read-write technology. There was no word for social network at that time. They called it read-write technology. And so a newspaper caught on and started going, this crazy woman's created read-write technology, because I wanted to get at behavioral data of students. As a neuroscientist, I'm thinking, I need inferential data on how kids are performing and what teachers are doing in the classrooms in order for me to personalize learning. And it was way out in front of anybody doing anything. And then Facebook came around and went, oh, read-write technology is social network. So I was way out there in front, and too far out in front. But the Gates Foundation and the school districts loved it. They didn't care what it was called. And it worked for them because it was a technology that was right. But in the marketplace, your product market fit may be 5 years away. And how do you create incremental technology so that you are going to be there 5 years from now? Because if you're not working towards that, you're going to find yourself far behind. But if you roll out your technology too far ahead of time, nobody's going to jump on it, and they're not going to understand it. And Synaptic MASH, I made the mistake of being almost a decade out in front of people. And it was a very painful thing, because now the Gates Foundation and everybody's like, we wish we had Synaptic MASH today, but I sold it to Promethean because the gap was too much. So I raised good money then and made great money, but when you go too far out, it's very painful. So with Declara, we realized that we had to do incremental changes in the platform so that we could help bring the market and drive them into the future without being so far out there. So that's one of the problems. And the second problem is, as a woman, is to not take no as an answer. So I had, and he'll remain nameless, I had an investor who invested in me personally, and then he had an angel fund, and then his VC large fund. And at first, he invested in me, and we built a bunch of great technology in Declara, and then he really liked the market we were going after. We were going after emerging markets like crazy, because we realized we needed to change Mexico. We needed to change different parts of the world in order so that we could improve education in Mexico, so that we didn't have this border tension going on. In fact, my goal was to make education so good in Mexico that we'd have American soccer moms illegally crossing the border into Mexico. But anyway, the interesting thing was that this investor said, or his team came up to me, first of all, we don't invest in women, we don't invest in people over 30, and we don't like government investments. And so he ended up saying, his team was like, no, 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 but they invested in us 3 times. And so if I took the insult from those guys and said, okay, they're saying, I don't like women, I don't like people over 30, and I don't like working in public sector, I would have walked away from that investor and I would not have raised as much money as I had. So we've raised $35 million. And the moral of the story there is to keep persisting and to have grit and to pursue your vision and prove it. So as we continued to prove the vision, it continued to be invested by this guy.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit about culture? Because when you do startups over and over, there must be some observations that you've made about what's really important as you're building the culture of a startup. Because what we're doing in X is sort of building startups over and over as well. Mm-hmm. So I'm really curious if there's any lessons you could share around that.
You know, every company and every mission has a little bit, creates a different kind of culture. And I say that because, you know, you attract a different kind of person who's going to solve problems in the public sector. So education, for instance. A lot of times we attract people who have made money or who are socially conscious. So people who believe in sort of like, I am not going to put profit above actually solving problems for very real situations on the ground. So, you know, we are a mission-driven company. And I like building companies that are mission-driven, whether it is like building technologies to solve practical problems in healthcare. When I actually worked for the Veterans Administration down the street here at the Palo Alto Brain Center, and we had to build neuro assessments for soldiers who were getting shot in the head, and we'd only have like 60 seconds to make this determinations of let the guy die, do surgeries. You know, we were dealing with a lot of things, and I was able to attract amazing people who barely got paid anything. And the culture around that is so different than, let's say, a financial startup. So when I moved from Synaptic Mash, a very mission-driven company, and we were solving some really amazing education problems, we brought in personalized learning for the first time into states where we would help kids who had, you know, had been gapped for 3 to 6 years, which meant that education systems stopped investing in these kids and put them on the pathway to prison. So what our platform did was looked at the modalities in which they learn best and the teachers who taught best in those modalities. And we took all of the McGraw-Hill content, digitized it, and then built a dynamic learning progression. So we'd look at the behaviors of the kids and keep testing the modalities in which they learn best. And we blew up the entire scheduling system. We said, fuck the scheduling system. We're going to just focus on what's best with kids. So teachers changed classrooms, not the kids. We were able to get those kids caught up in 6 weeks instead of 3 years or 4 years. And so those kids have gone on to college and are very successful that were in that program in the state of Indiana. The culture of that company, completely different than the culture in Promethean, which was profit driven. They were a public company and everybody was tuned around, you know, marginal or incremental profits every month. And so they had the traditional offices and hierarchies. And so the difference between like a grungy little startup that's mission driven is flat, transparent. I'd have people screaming at me and I was happy with that. It was, you know, because They were passionate. They'd go, Ramona, you are wrong. This is how we should do things. And then they'd rewrite my algorithm and I'd go, oh yeah, you can't do that. So we just, in a passionate culture, you want everybody to be flat and transparent and have the ability to push back on you, yell at you, get emotional about things, because you're actually trying to solve things that are hard and that are in need of having change or transformation. In for-profit companies, those hierarchies are often driven around, for the right reasons, making the shareholders wealthier. So cultures and startups, and the way we build cultures is around passion and really having the vision, having your own vision, because I believe everybody's the CEO in our company.
That's great. So obviously education is the problem that you're super passionate about, because you've attacked it from various different angles. And you've talked about how education in the US is very bureaucratic and ripe for disruption. And you obviously believe that technology can play a part in that. So can you talk a little bit about that, like the flaws you see in the educational system and what technology could help to solve that?
So I won't even deal with the current regime that we're dealing with. But I know we could have a whole talk about that. It brings the Marine in me up. But the bureaucracies in education are really rough. Like what we were doing in the state of Indiana actually broke all the state and federal laws, because the policies around education are around 330 minutes of seat time. You have to make sure people's butts are in the seat, even though that isn't good for students. So sometimes, like, I think about education, if I had all the money in the world, I would actually look at subject matter experts. So when I took all the data, I did a stint in between Promethean and Declara, where I worked with the Obama administration as a fellow in Digital Promise. So I took all the nation's data and I looked at what's happening with all the kids. And I thought, and I did this calculation with the Gates Foundation, I said I could probably roll up all the data from every classroom, every student for less than $50 million and build solutions around that. For instance, what we saw in fourth grade are that the data in math on all kids just dips terribly. And then in sixth grade, the data starts to come up for kids, but it doesn't all the way come up for the kids that drop in the math. And the easy fix in that is this, that what happens in fourth grade, you start getting introduced to algebra and decimals and more complex mathematics. Who's teaching that? A generalist. So you have a teacher who went into elementary school to teach because she hates math. And now you have someone who's ill-prepared to teach more complex math. So then you get less math time being spent with the teacher who's saying that she hates math, or he, and they're not subject matter experts. Imagine how powerful it would be just to turn her into a facilitator of learning and then open it up so that you have people like me and all of you guys who are probably phenomenal at math, actually being the subject matter experts and being able to leverage all of our technologies to teach these kids mathematics. Now, what I'm talking about is, can we just disrupt education so that we're not looking at borders, we're not looking at this district versus that district, but we're actually giving kids access to expertise that they wouldn't otherwise have around a scheduling system that works for them, actually splitting the weighted student formula so that the teacher isn't the subject matter expert, she's the babysitter or he's the babysitter, because people who are subject matter experts often aren't great facilitators. And so if you can combine that and break up the weighted student formula, we could solve a lot of problems in education very simply without huge investments. So that's...
There you go, a big idea. Right, I'm going to ask you 3 quick Proust questions, but I'm also going to open it up to the audience so everyone think about questions you might have for Ramona. Okay, so give me very rapid fire answers to these. So the first one is, what do you consider your greatest achievement and why?
My greatest achievement probably is the notion of personalization, coming up with thinking about behavioral trajectories of people. And I got that from my dog. And the second one is my recovery, not believing that I was going to die.
Yeah, okay. What do you consider your greatest failure and why?
Two of my greatest failures. When I needed to pivot fast, I did not, because I was looking at people in my room, my company, and I love my staff. And it was too painful for me to fire the people who didn't have the right skills I needed in the new pivot fast enough. Mm-hmm. And then I still had to do it, but then it shortened the life cycle of the company. So the best thing that you can do, fail forward, fail fast, really means pivot quickly. When you see that you're going to do that, no matter how painful it is, you have to reduce force and bring in the right people with the right skills, even if you love those people.
Okay. What's your greatest regret, if you have any?
My greatest regret, my greatest regret is, since my accident, I have been on a forced march because I've been driven by wanting to be back in being a productive person and contributing as quickly as possible to society, because I got the gift of being alive again in another 30 years of life. And probably my greatest regret right now is, and I'm going to, I now have been diagnosed with ALS, and my life is sunsetting quickly. So, I probably have months, a year, a couple of years left. And now I realized I have foreclosed on a lot of relationships. So the reason I can't speak is not because of my accident. It's I'm losing my voice to ALS, and I may completely lose my voice. And so I'm very quickly trying to speak to my family and friends that I haven't paid any attention to, because I was trying to solve all the big real world problems and ignored the people and friends who are closest to me. So now I spend every week trying to I get up from behind my computer and I go sit with my friends, I sit with my staff, I take people out to lunch. I never took lunch before, I never had breakfast with people, I never did anything. Now I'm eating all the time, having lunch with strangers. So anyway, it's those things that are the most important, use your spark in the places that are most important, because all of us only have a very short time. We can pretend like we have a lot of time, but we don't. And the second thing is, don't forget the people who are there with you every step of the way.
You did get married too.
Yes, I did. Yeah, throw that in.
To an amazing woman.
It only took us 20 years to get married.
Exactly. Okay, well, there were some external reasons too. Okay, so that maybe segues nicely into my last question, which is, what advice would you give your younger self?
Yes, I would tell my younger self to, I don't believe in work-life balance. If you're a committed person, just go for it. All feet first, jump off the cliff and drive and drive and drive. What is work-life balance? Work-life balance to me is fitting things in. But I would tell my younger self that remember the people that are helping you get there every step of the way, and that you take that moment to watch that sunset, and that you imprint that, and you imprint the people that you love. And my wife is sitting back there, and she's the most important person in my life. And then my best friend's sitting right there, and she's second most.
Amazing. Okay. Questions from the audience? I think Gladys has got a mic.
Your story is incredibly inspiring, and I think it goes without saying that you have a legacy, and you've left that legacy here at X, and you have it online via your TED Talks and everything that is either video or on print. You are a very inspiring person. But what I've learned is I get to hear Ramona Pierson, your story after the accident and how that has shaped who you are today and been such a huge part of who you are, what you stand for. But I am curious about your upbringing. Not everybody can wake up from a coma and say, I've learned transformative analytics, or be able to say, I'm going to go get a PhD from Stanford in neuroscience. That's very special and that's very unique. And I think that it would be interesting to hear about your upbringing and your studies, or you before and what you wanted to be when you were growing up, just to get a sense of that early beginning.
I was a very weird kid. So when I was growing up, like, my parents probably didn't even know I was in sports. They, I grew up at a time where your parents were having cocktails all the time with whoever. And it was like, what is that? Yes, exactly. That was our life. And so they'd go, kids are incidental. I don't know why they had us, but anyway, I kind of grew up with that. So, but I think that kind of gave me grit, because I had to sort of raise myself and raise my brothers, and my brothers and I fought all the time. We'd play in the neighborhood, and the neighbors would beat us up for, crossing the street. So our neighbors' parents were more involved in our lives than our parents were. So, and I had a mad scientist father, and my mother's IQ was off the charts, but she was a little bit like Hannibal Lecter. So our house was very Darwinism. And so only the strong would survive. And I grew up with, you had to be a self-starter, you had to manage your own homework. My parents were like, you will go to college. We're Jewish parents, you have to go to college or it's the death penalty. You have to get A's all the time or it's the death penalty. But they didn't care how you got from here to here. You had to figure it out, because they weren't going to help you figure it out. But my parents were super literate. They'd read books every night, so they modeled that for us. My father was he was an engineer. He was constantly solving math problems all the time. So I grew up in a way where we were experimenting. It was okay to blow things up or set the kitchen on fire, or, they didn't really worry about the small things, as long as we didn't kill the dogs or each other. So anyway, I grew up in chaos, so, and I think a little chaos is good for kids. I don't know if I really, like, now we've prescribed play for kids, and every neuroscientist in the world will tell you that is not good for your brain development. Every psychologist in the world will say play helps your children, informal play, helps your children actually learn how to problem solve, because they get in fights on the playground and they have to figure out, how do we solve that? How do we learn to make up rules, and how do we invent games? All those things help to create inventors, risk takers, problem solvers. And now as adults, we want our kids to do formal play, become a professional soccer player. And once I was invited to be a speaker at some professional soccer thing where all the moms came to me and they go, well, you used to be a professional athlete. Tell us, should our kids play soccer 6 hours a day? And I said, oh my God, no, they should do every sport that exists out there. And it wasn't what they wanted to hear, but I really believed in, being exposed to everything. I tried gymnastics as a kid and tried everything. And what I ended up liking and loving was running, and that got me off to the Olympic trials. So, but I came up with that, not my parents.
Thanks. Good question. I have just to follow on that. I'm just intrigued by your personality, which seems a little bit untraditional, and I'm wondering how that worked in the Marines.
At first it was really problematic, because every time someone would tell me to stand at attention, I'd start laughing. because I was like, what's the purpose? I should be doing something else that's more purposeful. Give me the rifle, you know. So then, you know, then they started beating me. So then I started going, okay, I need to become aware that, you know, this is an unusual circumstance. And after having to use my toothbrush to clean the toilet so many times, I realized that I didn't want to brush my teeth after that, and that I had to get in line. So they literally beat me into compliance. But, you know, I think the hardest part for me in the service, and I ended up being Leatherneck of the Year and being the most physically fit Marine of the Year. I was doing 150 pull-ups. I beat all the men. I could outperform most men at 13-mile runs. With the biggest challenge I had at that time was the helmet was 15 pounds and the pack was 60 pounds. So I looked like Private, you know, Benjamin or something. Like every time I put my head back, the pack would hit my helmet and then it'd fall forward and then I'd fall over face first. But so that was the hardest thing for me. But I became a really good soldier for that. I think my detriment was they'd want me to solve certain problems in aviation around some of the math, the black box stuff in a particular way, even though I knew in my heart it had to be done differently. So I used to break the rules and try to solve these things in non-traditional form. And I know that the military today is trying to let younger soldiers have new ideas. But when I was in the service, you know, even though I could solve the problems faster and more accurately in my way, I was constantly screamed at.
Okay, one other question. When you went to the senior citizens home, was your family, like, would they come visit you and check your progress, or what, you just like there all by yourself?
You know, my dad was dead, but you know, I still have this problem with my family. You know, there's all kinds of things going on and I can't get them to engage. Like, they're all workaholics. They're all like, I'll see you after I finish X, Y, and Z. So everybody in my family, my younger brother is, you know, he's opening up new restaurants. My older brother, I mean, everybody works so much, they won't stop to engage. So basically at that time, my siblings were struggling with a lot of stuff. My little brother ended up in a foster home. My older brother had run away from home, and now their lives are together and they have kids and stuff. But we had a really rough going after my father died.
You talked a lot about breaking the rules to get to success and innovation. Can you talk a bit about how you're doing that or striving to do that at your current company, Declara?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of ways. So, you know, we wanted to test out some algorithms. So instead of testing it out on our customers and driving them crazy, we decided to break into Twitter. So we built a bunch of bots that acted like people so that we could take all their profiles out, take all their content out. So we stole about 400 million identities and did a bunch of things. And then we realized, oh, we can build a behavioral trajectory off of all this data. It's great data. And we did it without paying Twitter for their pipeline. So anyway, it was just like this crazy thing that we did. But we work a lot with governments, and so they would have been pissed off if I broke into all their systems doing that. But sometimes to be able to advance your technology, you sort of have to break some rules so that you can get access to the data that you need to be able to test out a lot of algorithms. we shouldn't record this. But
It is recorded.
I know. Like even now, you know, I think about healthcare. So if we're going to solve a lot of problems in healthcare, we have to get at all of this healthcare data, like the health insurance data. Then we can start actually building personalized healthcare and anticipating what diseases are coming up based on different types of hospital stays, medications. And if we could actually join all of this data, we could improve healthcare like crazy. And, but the only way we're going to actually do that is if somebody was either to talk these companies through HIPAA compliance and come up with new ideas around that, or somebody's going to have to go rogue and try to do that. So, but you didn't hear that from me.
Wow, well, that's an inspiring thought to end on, like how to hack the health system.
Right.
So we're out of time. So I'm going to thank you officially very much for this fireside chat. And for those of you in the room, we're going to have lunch with Ramona in the little room just around the corner. Thank you very much.
Thank you.